This week's gospel, Jesus talks about the signs of the end of the age and when he's going to come back. Now, this is part of this build up at the end of one liturgical year and beginning of another liturgical year that focuses on the end of the world and on Jesus's, sometimes we call it, second coming. So you may remember last week Jesus talked about the resurrection and how there's no marriage in heaven, but there is a heaven and there is a resurrection. Right? This week he's talking about the signs of the end of times. Next week we're going to be looking at Jesus on the cross, talking about bringing his kingdom, and then we roll into the first and second weeks of Advent, which focus on Jesus returning again at the end of time. That's kind of how the end of the liturgical year wraps up and the beginning of a new year rolls out before we start focusing on baby Jesus and all that fun stuff. So what's going on in this reading? It's kind of confusing. It's a little bit scary, especially for kids, to hear some of this stuff. What is Jesus getting at? First of all, he's saying there are certain things that are going to happen before he comes. Well, I guess before we get to that, first of all, Jesus is affirming as a fact of faith that he will come back in a bodily form, right? He comes back every day in the Eucharist. He comes to us in the grace of the sacraments. He comes to us whenever we pray, right, in these less visible ways sometimes. But he's promising he's going to come back in his body at the end of time. And so that's a fact of faith that we should not doubt. Right? Remember at the Ascension when Jesus floats up into the sky and the apostles are staring up and the angels come and they're like, what are you looking at? And they say, well, Jesus is going to return the same way that he left. He's coming back in his body. And he just affirms that in this gospel. But then he says there's going to be some things that are going to happen before that takes place, right? There's going to be wars and rumors of wars and stars falling out of the sky, all this calamitous stuff. Some of that is poetic language. He's referring to the destruction of the temple. Some of that is just traditional prophetic hyperbole that talks about it's going to get rough for a while. What Jesus is really affirming is there's bad stuff happening now, and there's bad stuff that's going to be happening until the end of the age. And just expect that, because he even says these aren't necessarily the signs of the immediate end. They're just the labor pains. It's kind of the start of the process, right? Every age has thought the world must be ending soon because things are so messed up right now, and our age is no different. Things are bad, things are good in every age, right? So what are we supposed to do then? What is Jesus, what is the takeaway here? He's kind of alerting us to the fact, one, we need to be ready, because he says that over and over and over. We're going to hear that at the beginning of Advent. But two, he talks about, like, how are we going to distinguish between him and people who claim to be him but aren't? We have to know him. We have to know his voice. We have to spend time with him in prayer. We have to read the scriptures. We have to know what Jesus sounds like and what he says and how he acts so that we can recognize him when he's here, or else anybody could show up and claim, yeah, I'm Jesus, I'm back, and we could be fools for following them. We have to know Jesus. That's the whole point of life, to know him, to love him, to serve him in this life so we can be with him forever in the next. We've got to know him, and the only way to get to know him is through prayer, through the scriptures, through the church's teachings. So spend time with those so that we can get to know the voice of our shepherd.